Welcome to Exploring Possibilities, a show where we interview a variety of holistic professionals and light workers who are really making a bigger difference in our world. I'm your host, Cheryl Sitz, and it was my purpose in creating this show to introduce you to the incredible people that I'm meeting on my own journey. You'll hear their stories because their stories really are our stories, and we'll explore the vast realm of holistic healing and learn how we can co-create holistic sustainability. There's a lot of possibilities out there we don't often hear about, so this is a way we can learn and grow together on this path. Don't hesitate to reach out and connect with anybody you might hear who resonates for you, because we've got a lot of great guests. Special thanks to Mario Rosales of Tech Life Balance. He does a lot of hard work behind the scenes producing these and publishing our podcasts, as well as on our Journey of Possibilities website. He really helps me use technology to make a bigger difference, so I appreciate it very much. I want to remind everybody to be sure and subscribe to our podcast by searching for Exploring Possibilities, either on iTunes if you're an Apple user, or you can download an app called Stitcher if you're on Android or another platform, and just search for Exploring Possibilities and subscribe. That way you'll never miss one of our podcasts because we have such interesting guests. And that's a perfect segue into today's guest. I'm so excited to have with me Alan Davidson, who has a lot of credentials for himself, but basically he really helps people embody their spiritual enlightenment and learn how to work with that within today's marketplace if they are professionals in that industry. And we're going to talk a lot about his gifts and his story. I read about Alan recently in a Huffington Post article, and when I heard his story, I said, I have got to have this guy on the show. Alan, thank you for being willing to join us today. Alan Davidson.
Well, thank you very much, Cheryl. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be with you and your audience, and I'm happy to share what wisdom I can today.
Oh, you have such an amazing story, and I always start with the story. A lot of times we can get lost in our stories, so it's kind of an interesting paradigm there, but it is our story that prepares us so perfectly to live our soul purpose, and your story is a rich one. I want to mention your website, throughyyourbody.com. That's THROUGH, yourbody.com. And Alan, can we start with, wow, I don't even want to try and tell anything about your story. I have a feeling that you can do a better job on your own, but you started in a really interesting place in the 80s you tell it. Tell us about how your life prepared you for the path that you're living now and a little bit about your history, would you?
Okay, sure. Well, so imagine the 1960s and trying to be a gay kid in very rural Texas.
Wow.
And I spent a lot of time fantasizing and imagining getting as far away from small-town rural Texas as I possibly could. And eventually my family did move to Irving, a big suburb of Dallas, and I began to find at least other gay kids and understand that there was a gay world out there that wasn't everything that the conservative Texas church had told me about myself.
Mm-hmm.
But then fast forward to 1981, I moved to Houston to become bartender to the Fabulous. And I like to say that in a very long 3-day weekend, we had more fun than the entire state of Oklahoma had in a year. No offense to our friends north of the Texas border. But, there were about 50 guys that traveled in a huge pack. And, we went to art openings and movies and concerts and plays and clubs and, just had so much fun, so much joy. But that joy and that fabulous lifestyle came with a very high price, and that price was HIV/AIDS, which started hitting us in our group in about 1984. And when we first learned that AIDS was a virus, I just assumed that I would die a very gruesome, painful, and lonely death because I was an IV drug user. And I had shared needles with men who had already died from AIDS. So I just assumed that I was positive.
Right. Wow.
And, just about that time, I had hit my emotional and spiritual and physical rock bottom and asked a friend to take me to an AA meeting. And I got sober. And so as I began to have some level of hope for at least what was left of my life, I had to decide, Cheryl, am I making short-term plans or am I making long-term plans? And I happened to live with a medical doctor at the time that was saying, Alan, I think you might be negative. You're just too healthy. Mm-hmm. And after hearing him say that over and over and over for 6 months, I built up the courage to go get one of the very first HIV tests. And miraculously, I was and still am HIV negative. And I knew that I had played Russian roulette with my life, and that divine providence or God or the goddess or however you want to frame the intelligence that moves the created universes, I had been spared. I didn't know for what, but I left the Montrose Clinic that day after that HIV test, vowing to quit squandering my talents and gifts and to figure out how to use them in a way that I could help make a difference in my community and in the world. And 6 months later, I found myself in massage school. And that was really the door that opened for me to reclaim my body, to begin this very slow process of opening my heart, to make peace with my mind and allow my spirit to soar and dance the way that it does today.
Alan, just backing it up just a little bit, I too went through testing, and I have a past that involved drugs. And I did not use needles, but I had been intimate with people who had. And so I remember that scare very vividly because it was very real for many of us, with not as much risk as you felt like you had. And I remember going and getting that test and then them telling me the waiting period to find out. And those were the longest hours of my life.
Right.
Well, I know you had to feel that.
Yeah, in my day it was 2 weeks to wait.
Yes.
And I remember after that 2 weeks going back, and there was even that thought of, gee, why go back? It seems so obvious, why face it?
Yeah.
But I did go back, and I remember sitting in the lobby of the Montrose Clinic, and the walls just seemed to resonate with the fear of all the other people who had sat in those chairs waiting for the news that they would die.
Yes.
So yeah, it was scary, a very, very scary time, because there was just so much that wasn't known. But the reality was that there were men dying horrible, painful, gruesome, lonely deaths over and over and over around me. Just literally, I knew hundreds and hundreds of men who died.
Wow. And that is not a segment of our society that we have been supportive to in very many ways. I know that was a lonely path before that scare. And to go through that, I had support around me. And yeah, it was 2 weeks for me too, but I bring that out now because I want anybody listening to feel the transformation that can happen within a 2 week period of waiting and then finding out you have a second chance at life. And so I can definitely understand why that began to send you in a different direction, especially finding out then, wow, I don't have what I thought I had and I'm not going to die the way I thought I was going to die, and watching this around you. You were instrumental in raising funds to make a difference in the AIDS epidemic, weren't you? Can you, in a pretty interesting way, you want to share that?
Well, sure. And I'll tell you, going back to being a kid in small town Texas, I was actually, even though now I am a 6'4" and quite boisterous, sort of colorful character, I was actually, very shy and very polite and sort of very reserved. Yes, sir. No, ma'am. Good little boy. And bullied quite a lot. Mm-hmm. But once I, came out and moved to Oak Lawn, which is the suburb of Dallas that was the gay community back in 1977, and started drinking, and then eventually found my way to drugs. The alcohol and the drugs, took away that social anxiety and that fear and that deep, deep-seated self-hatred that I had from, growing up in a culture that said that I was evil and that I should be destroyed.
Right.
And so through that process of becoming a very colorful person and working in the nightclubs, and there's always lots of opportunities for costumes and parties and events, and have always loved theater. I was in the drama club in high school, so it was a short step to assume a personality named Passionetta von Climax, which is, as I like to say, the largest drag queen in captivity. So imagine a 6'4" man in 4-inch steel reinforced high heels with 2 wigs on top of his head. So very, very tall, a huge presence, and literally Passionetta and her troupe of friends raised thousands and thousands of dollars for AIDS charities here in Houston. And one of the big events that we used to always do was the Stone Soup Pantry, which is the food pantry for AIDS survivors. And, in an afternoon, we would raise 3 or 4 pickup trucks full of food for the pantry with our performances.
I believe you. I'm trying to get this visual, and I grew up in the Houston area, and a lot of things don't surprise me anymore because I grew up in the Houston area. But I think that one would still turn my head a couple of times. I bet you were grand looking.
Well, there was a point I was my mechanic, my straight friend Bobby is my mechanic, and he had a Jeep. And the only way I could get from my home in full costume was to borrow his Jeep with the lid taken off of it. And I had to drive downtown to the nightclub. And he happened to be driving with his girlfriend through downtown, and they saw me, and his girlfriend looked at him and said, "Who the hell is that driving your Jeep?" Because I had those 2 wigs all wrapped in a scarf. It was a very Isadora Duncan moment, driving through downtown Houston.
That's great. Wow. So I don't even know how to go from that to where I wanted to go next in the conversation. But you bring a lot of humor and a lot of lightheartedness to something very serious. And I'm sure that was medicinal for people as well, just to be able to laugh and play in that time when there was so much sorrow and angst. And so I think that's a beautiful gift that you bring in the form of you.
Well, thank you. And I will tell you, I'm not sure that I believe in reincarnation or karma, but what I can tell you is that as long as I can remember, I remember in high school when I figured out that I was gay and that there really wasn't a passing phase and that this was who I was. I went through about 6 weeks of depression and despair, and then finally realized, God made me this way, and God did not make a mistake. And I don't care what the hell the conservative Christian church has to say about this, they're wrong. And I can't imagine how a kid from rural Texas could come to that place of certainty with that. Now, obviously, I had a lot of issues that were layered on top of that from, growing up in our world. But I always, and unfortunately for me, I threw the Christian church out the door, like threw the baby out with the bathwater. But I always was looking for a spiritual solution, and I turned to the Eastern tradition. The path of enlightenment. And it took me a long time to come back to what Christ actually taught versus what the Christian church teaches on his behalf. And
that's an excellent distinction, by the way. I mean, you can say that again. What Christ actually taught versus what people are professing he taught, all the interpretations. That was a big, profound one for me, too. So please go ahead.
Right. Well, I mean, it's the same with the Buddha. It's the same with Lao Tzu, the author of the Tao Te Ching, even Mother Teresa and the Dalai Lama. These great, great world teachers have experiences of the mystical domains of experience, and then they try to talk about them to people who've never transcended their small mind, their small ego, their small personality. And so those small minds have to create doctrines and practices based on what they think these great teachers are saying.
Yes.
And so my path is, life is a mystical, joyful, beautiful, fabulous adventure if you can develop the skill to transcend that small self. And now, fortunately for us in 2014, there are so many practices that make that leap across that Grand Canyon of consciousness from the small ego to this amazing mystical experience of awareness. You don't have to sit in a monastery for 15 years and hope you have an experience anymore. In an hour, with the technologies and the practices we have today, someone who's never meditated before in their life can have a mystical experience and go, oh, wow, now I know what Jesus was talking about. Now I know what Buddha was talking about. Now I know what Lao Tzu was pointing to in his poetry.
Yes, I definitely want to talk to you about that practice, because what you just said is the work that you're doing now, and I definitely want to talk about that. I just want to backtrack a little bit and talk about a book, a best-selling book that you wrote a few years back, Body Brilliance, Mastering 5 Vital Body Intelligences. And one of the similarities that I think we actually spoke about before this interview that I felt with you is, for anyone listening that's thinking, wow, so here's a gay man trying to make peace with that and his body and heal that. This is a very universal issue. There are many like me who had inappropriate sexual experiences when we were young, from incest to rape to date rape, drugs. There's a lot of issues happening out there that I would say more people than not have body image issues. The cosmetology industry trying to teach us new ways that we're not good enough every day, so we can need more and more of their products to try and fit a model that most of our bone structures wouldn't even hold. There's many, many different aspects to this body image thing, and you really address all of that in your book and in your work. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, sure. Unfortunately, the last 125 years or so, we came out of a long, long period of, for the most part, worldwide body hatred. Certainly the Christian tradition has a lot of fear and distrust of the body. The 7 deadly sins are based on the different sensations and pleasures of the body. And, again, the Christians threw the baby out with the bathwater and said, oh, the body's evil, the pleasures of the body are evil. But even in the mystical traditions, in the Buddhist and the Hindu traditions, there's a lot of body hatred. It's like, transcend the mind, transcend the ego, transcend the body. Mm-hmm. Even to the point of saying the body isn't real, or three-dimensional time and space isn't real.
Right.
And so fortunately in the last 120 years, there's been a lot of it to do with some of the Western psychologists, coming out of Carl Jung and, some of his students and later practitioners. Fritz Perls, the founder of Gestalt psychotherapy, is a big proponent of coming back to the body and bringing the body in the process of awareness and healing and wholeness and enlightenment. And now even people like Eckhart Tolle are talking about the easiest way to experience the now is to turn inward and experience the inner body, the energy and sensations of energy in your body. So we come from 2,000 years, a legacy of hating the body and denying the body. And I think you mentioned, like the cosmetology industry, they're playing to the fears and the insecurities of the ego mind.
Yes.
And it's not until we can step out of that and own the beauty and the grace and the righteousness of our physical body and the wholesomeness of our, I would say, mature pleasures. Your body can hold all the possible shame you can dump into it, but it's also capable of all the most ecstatic pleasure and joy and love available in the creative universe. And you get to choose which one you want to experience and sense day in and day out.
That's very powerful. Thank you for stating that. And that's where some of this holistic practice comes in so beneficially, is healing and shifting from shame to love. It is a journey, and it's a journey I've been on for a few years, and there are many modalities out there to help with that. I also wanted to go back and mention, if you're thinking that Alan Davidson here sounds pretty smart, well, he is. He's got degrees in psychology, sociology, philosophy, religion. He's done a lot of studying to get to this place where he can speak at any level that you want to speak at about the wholeness of these truths. And that's one of the things that's so fun about talking to you, Alan. So thanks for that. You are doing some cutting edge work, bringing together what is called big mind meditation. You're a big mind meditation facilitator and working with EFT or tapping. Can you speak a little bit about the transformation that you're able to facilitate now for people with that?
Well, sure. And I'll tell you, it's my absolute favorite thing to experience. I practice it every morning myself. Well, I'd say most mornings, let's put it that way. And it's my favorite thing to share in the world. I remember, well, first, what is big mind meditation? It's sort of a lineage that started with Carl Jung and what he taught as active imagination, Fritz Perls, who I mentioned before, and the empty chair exercise. Hal and Sidra Stone. Hal is a Jungian analyst, and they created a body of work called voice dialogue. Now, most people listening, Cheryl, will have heard of some of these inner voices or inner personalities or sub-personalities. Some of them, like the inner critic, is a well-known one, or the innocent and vulnerable child, or the golden child, or even the wounded self, or Eckhart Tolle calls the pain body. Those are all voices or sub-personalities within us. Have you heard of that?
Yes, I'm also being reminded of the archetypes that Carolyn Myss, publicized, and those are several of those are archetypes that we bring forth in that modality as well. So yes, I'm very familiar with that.
Right. Well, and voice dialogue is the process of actually realizing that I can speak to an archetype. I can actually go through a process and sort of differentiate between the Cheryl that's walking around most of her day concerned about, her appointments and how she looks and how she feels and what's her purpose and all that stuff. And you can distinguish that, and you can actually speak to the inner critic. And the inner critic has his or her own perspective on what she should be doing and what's good for her, what's safe for her, what she should stay away from, what kind of world she lives in. And so the idea is to be able to differentiate and distinguish all these other voices and just dialogue and listen to them. It's a very profound process.
It sounds like it.
Like anyone that's studied Gestalt would remember an exercise of if you've got daddy issues, you're in one chair and there's an empty chair in front of you, you're supposed to switch and become your daddy. And then you're dialoguing and speaking to that energetic self you left in the chair behind you. That's the empty chair exercise. Well, the Zen master, Genpo Roshi, who's an American Zen master, had the opportunity to work with Hal and Sidra Stone and watch this in depth and see the power and the impact with it. And the seeds were then planted for what would become big mind meditation. And 20 years later, Genpo realized that not only do we have all these voices of our personality that are rattling around in our brain, creating a cacophony of opinions and ideas of what we should and shouldn't be doing, but from what the mystical traditions have taught for 5,000 years, the already always enlightened voices are there. The Divine Mother, the Divine Father, the archetypes that you mentioned, all those aspects of consciousness that transcend the little self. And just with a short facilitation process, usually within 20 to 40 minutes, anybody can have the experience of Buddha mind, of Satori, of nirvana, of enlightenment, of, that state that the Dalai Lama sits in, or that state that the Mother Teresa operated in with her magnificent open heart, the Divine Mother quality. We can experience those ourselves in our body, in our own sensation, and go, wow.
And you said everybody can get this. Like, you haven't had anybody not be able to get to nirvana in a 20-minute to 40-minute session with you.
I have facilitated well over 1,000 people at this point, and every single person So far, have had the experience. Now, what I have done with my studies with, I did a year of voice dialogue psychotherapy myself, and I did years of working with a mentor who, she was a body worker, but, with like the voices of resistance and pain in the body, what are those voices trying to tell us? So I was very grounded in that voice dialogue process, and then I met Genpo Roshi. And even though I had been meditating off and on for over 20 years, I had never had a genuine Satori experience of pure stillness and silence. And the very first time I experienced Big Mind, I went there, and I just went, my gosh, this is what I've been looking for all of my life, this place of stillness and to transcend the suffering of my ego self. Now, what I do is I've also layered some shadow work and some EFT tapping into that Big Mind process. I call it Enlightened Tapping Meditation. And the tapping, the EFT piece, really helps the voices of the subpersonality to relax and let go. And then when you make that leap across that Grand Canyon of consciousness to Satori, Nirvana, enlightenment, Buddha mind, Buddha heart, using the tapping then anchors that experience into your connective tissues, into your bones, and into your energy field. So when you want to go back, it's like just pushing the key on a record player. It's like, oh, I want to have Buddha mind, or gee, I want to have Mother Teresa's, wide open heart. Oh, gee, I want to have stillness, and go right back to that place, and you've got the experience of it anchored in your body and your mind, so you can go back with just snapping with your intention. It's right there.
So I can be busy at work, and I can bring that back to me?
You totally can. You totally can. And it's just, it's like an affirmation that you might say every day, but instead of going to the mirror, just saying, oh, gee, Cheryl, I love you, or gee, Cheryl, I love and appreciate you, or I accept you just as you are, you just say, oh, I am, stillness of pure being, which is a Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist term for the field of energy that supports all the created universes, the stillness of pure being. It's like, I am the stillness of pure being. I am that field that supports all of creation. And so that really is the path of enlightenment, is to come back and experience it in the body over and over and over again until it, instead of just a fleeting state of awareness, it becomes an actual stage in your evolutionary development as a human being.
Exactly.
And so we go through hours of feeling that, or days of feeling that, or weeks of feeling that voice, that experience, and it becomes our new normal.
So playing devil's advocate here, because I have to try and do that sometimes, because if we don't have the audience calling in.
What I love about this work is that all devils are welcome.
Exactly. That's funny. So I've done some shamanic work, and I know what it's like to go to that place and then come out of that ceremony and try and integrate that into this busy, often crazy world. And that can be challenging. And I think it's really interesting that you say that we're anchoring it in our body so that we can go back to that at any time. Isn't the real challenge trying to learn how to live that in this world, or do you see us changing this world to a world we can live that way in?
Well, I think both are true, Cheryl. It's like, one, we have to figure out how can I sustain this beautiful state experience of stillness, or, a compassion that is, unshakable, inexhaustible capacity for compassion for all the suffering in the world. It's like, okay, gee, I can feel that for 2 minutes.
Right.
But then how do we, I read the New York Times every day. It's sort of, I make myself read it because there is so much pain in the world. But I want to know what my brothers and sisters are going through, and what the insanity of the human race is capable of if we don't find our way out of this.
Amen.
And so the challenge for me is to be able to open my heart to that insanity and in that pain and that suffering, and be fully present with it. And that's my practice. So reading the paper for me or watching the evening news for me is a spiritual practice, because the minute I say, oh, they shouldn't do that, the Palestinians shouldn't be, kidnapping and killing Israeli kids, or the Israelis shouldn't be bombing, UN centers in Palestine. The minute I start go to that place of life shouldn't, you shouldn't, it shouldn't, I know that I'm in my personal small mind, and that it's time to shift to a much greater perspective where I can hold all of that insanity from a place of stillness and compassion. So there's that practice there of meeting the world just the way it is. But I also know, and I have the faith, that the more people like you, Cheryl, and the more people that are listening to this interview, and the more people all across the world that are taking on practices like this, and they're moving to that place of transcendence and integration and wholeness and love, that the more of us that do that, we create a tipping point so that the world shifts with us. And the problems that have plagued humanity for the last 5,000 years, they will shift, they will change. Now, we'll most likely have new problems, but the hatred and the poverty and the cruelty and the war that we have now, I believe, and Ken Wilber, the founder of Integral Theory, has said that if 10% of the world's population moves to this place of enlightenment, that it will create a tipping point that will shift consciousness as we know it on this planet. And right now we're around 3.5%, maybe 4% of the world's population at this level of conscious development. And if we can get to 10%, which is about the population of Europe, then we can create a transformation, a cauldron of transformation that will help humanity begin to really grow up and begin to embody what you said, soul purpose. I think that is every soul's destiny, is to embody our soul purpose and to live it wholeheartedly and fully. And if 10% of the world's population are embodying our soul purpose, then it will be an extraordinary time of change and transformation.
And I don't believe it's if, I believe it's when. I meet people waking up every day, and it just excites and thrills me. I believe that we're moving to that place quicker than we think. And this is such a timely interview because Chopra held his worldwide meditation for peace earlier today on the day that we're recording this. And he had a great tune in, and the numbers went up, and I do believe it. I believe we're shifting our collective global consciousness in a beautiful way. And we always look for, well, how can I make a bigger difference? We are the bigger difference we need to make. If everybody just takes care of our own little internal work, which is the last place we want to go half the time, then we're going to get there.
Right. Well, and I am a firm believer. So much of the world, I talked about the ego and the small self. The number one way to notice if you're in your small self, your personal self, is if you're looking to the outside world for some level of gratification or satisfaction or peace or anything. So, when we shift that to the internal world of, I must be peace, I must be love, I must be compassion, I must be present, then that's when the dynamics really start to speed up. And if I can embody those qualities of peace and presence, then all of a sudden, miracles, mischief, and magic happen, is the way I like to describe it. Because people come into my life where I'm guided to, pick up the phone and reach out and have a conversation with someone, or, I'm find this impulse, this instinct to move someplace, in my day, an extraordinary connection happens. And it's like, I feel like all of a sudden, even though I'm fully present, I feel like I'm dancing with the divine and extraordinary things are happening. But what I also realize is that I'm leading the dance.
Yes.
And because I am the captain of my own ship, I have embodied those spiritual principles. And as long as I remember to do that and surrender, and love myself and love my life and love my world, then I am the most potent, the most practical, the most profound I can be, minute to minute, breath to breath, day to day. And that's how I choose to live my life.
Well said. I have to tell you, something's coming up to me. I had a conversation with a young man earlier this week, and he was talking about how, I've gotten into the meditation a bit and some of these practices, but I also am an adrenaline junkie and I love to have fun and live on the edge. And so I feel like I'm trying to balance two extremes. And it kind of comes up for me because we started our conversation talking about your very colorful past and your very flamboyant alter ego and some of the efforts that you've done to raise money and so forth and make a difference. How do you balance these two different aspects of yourself and allow full expression of yourself to play?
Well, so, there's a wonderful quote by Rumi, and it is, your job is not to search for love, it's to remove all the blocks you have erected to love. And, the way the world seems to work right now is that babies are born into our world and they get indoctrinated to a set of beliefs and limitations, and they're culturalized and socialized and yada, yada, yada. And from that, we all have our defenses, our complexes, our character issues, that we grow up with and that we try to resolve in our adult life. And so some of that, very colorful personality that you talked about was a reaction to, it was that rebellion against that small conservative Texas town that I grew up in. And how can I be the most outrageous person to say and point the finger and say, you can't tell me who I'm going to be and who I want to be.
Right.
But in the bigger spiritual path, now a Passionetta von Climax is not only a drag queen who raises money for charity for AIDS in the 80s, but a Passionetta von Climax is a persona that I can slip into and that I can play with and that I can teach from that place and be very entertaining and outrageous and say wonderful things where perhaps, the everyday Alma wouldn't have the courage to say.
Right.
So it becomes a wonderful, skillful tool for teaching and getting attention and spreading a message that is very playful and fun. But it's not somebody that I'm trapped in because it's a reaction to my old wounded self.
Oh, I love that. That's perfect. Exactly. Our life path prepares us for something bigger down the road as a place that we can relate from and not a place to react from. That's so well put.
Right. And, Carl Jung used to ask a question, Cheryl, that I loved. And I use it with my business clients, and I use it, for myself, and I use it for my meditation students. And the question that Carl Jung would say, if when you're faced with a choice, and you make that choice, what is it in service to? The question is, what is this in service to? And he was always asking, is this in service to your fear and your complex? Or it is in service to your opening and your healing and your self-actualization, your self-realization? So that's a great spiritual practice to ask every day. What is this day in service to? Is it in service of more defense and pain and fear? Or is it in service to a wholeness and an opening and an embodying joy and playfulness and creativity?
That's a perfect way to check in. If we would slow down enough to ask ourselves those questions, that's half the battle, isn't it?
Right. Well, and I'm going to circle all the way back around to the body, because I know that was something that you liked about my work.
Yes.
Is, for me, the foundational practice of presence, of healing, is what I call sense and center. And it's just the capacity to sense my body, to be aware of, oh, gee, what's the pressure against my left little toe? What's the quality of temperature on my right elbow? What's the vibration in my right ear? What am I actually sensing in my physical body right now? And so the sensory experience is the body always happens in the present moment. It never happens in the past. It never happens in the future. Your body will never lie to you. Now, your mind can play tricks on you, but the body, if you practice sensing your body second to second to second, it's always shifting and changing. And so that anchoring your attention, your awareness in the immediate sense of your body and just being centered, that's a martial art component of being centered in the second chakra, the Dantian, the Hara, just below your belly button. That's the gravitational center, the energetic center of your body. So if you combine that sense and center and you're just being present in your body, then that trains me. That was my first real training to be present. And so then questions like, in service to what, comes from that sensory awareness of my body. And it helps me decide, is this choice, does it give me fear? Does it cause contraction? Is it a defense? Or is it that, gee, I'm stepping into life? And even though that can be a little anxiety producing, there is that sense of expansion and openness and pleasure and release. It's like, oh, I am stepping into more of my truth. So enlightenment is a bodily practice, it is a sensory practice, and it is a bodily experience. It's a sensory experience. So claiming and owning and honoring the body, to me, is first and foremost to healing all the wounds that we might have had in our life and stepping into this magnificent life that you're pointing to, and our ability to create a future and a world that we all want to live in.
I love that. I love how you put all of that. You have quite a way with words as well. And I actually went through a 10-day Vipassana meditation. And for anyone that wants a deep intro experience into that, it's based on what are you sensing in this moment and now this moment. And it was really nice introduction to some of the stuff you're talking about.
Right. Well, my core somatic body teachers were rigorous Vipassana teachers. And, they thought they had found that, stumbled on it themselves, only to learn that paying attention to the body rigorously in stillness was something the Buddha taught 2,400 years ago, and it's what is now known as Vipassana or insight meditation.
Wonderful. Well, I want to ask you real quickly to share with us how clients can interact with you. Is this work all done interpersonally, live, or is there access by phone or internet, or how can you help people that want to go down this road with you that resonate with your work?
Well, I'll say that I'm very proud that my Enlightened Tapping Meditation, back in March, I filmed my home study course, my home training of this, and it'll actually be done in a couple of weeks. So if you want to stay in touch with me, go to throughyyourbody.com and get on the mailing list.
Perfect.
And there'll be opportunities to, have live events. I do meditation trainings. Wherever in the world I'm invited to go, I go. So I seem to be going to Boston regularly and San Diego regularly. I've been invited to Los Angeles to teach. So wherever I'm invited, I go, I teach, I share the work.
That's so good. The world's becoming smaller every day as this enlightenment movement continues.
It is. And I will, in support of, my product and training being available, there'll be more, videos, there'll be more calls, there'll be more things available to people. But you can go to my website right now, throughyyourbody.com, and do a search on Enlightened Tapping. And there's at least an audio on there that you can at least listen to it. You may not get the experience, the magical of sort of having it all explained to you, being in a group, but you'll get a taste for sure.
And you are in the Houston area for anyone that wants to come live, and you say within 40 minutes, you'll be in nirvana.
Yep.
I love that.
What I say is that in 40 minutes, whether you've meditated ever in your life or not, you can have the same experience the Dalai Lama has when he sits in daily meditation, which is classically they would call that Buddha mind, but another way is just saying it's stillness, it's pure awareness, it's completely transcended the personality and the ego.
Alan, I'm just going to have to come over and experience that with you. I can tell that already.
Well, come on down.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, we've been talking to Alan Davidson. Definitely reach out and connect on throughyourbody.com. That'll be on the title as well. Any parting words for us, Alan?
No. What I would just say is that, ask that question every day, in service to what? And most of us live in a very, very small contained space. Maybe it's a coffin, maybe it's a basement, maybe it's a dungeon, or, maybe even it's in a beautiful mansion. But you are so much more than what you have been led to believe. And that all you have to do is figure out your way of stepping out of that small-mindedness to experience greater and greater levels of yourself. And then you have to bring all of that beautiful new awareness and love and presence back into your body and to own it and integrate it with every gesture and every breath and every thought and every feeling and every choice. And that's the practice of sensation by sensation, moment by moment, breath by breath, enlightening your life and claiming your power and standing in your own spiritual authority. And no matter how intoxicating all the other distractions of the three-dimensional world can be, there is nothing more exciting or profound or satisfying or joyful than that process of figuring out who you are and bringing that back to your body over and over and over again.
You said it all. I have nothing else to add to that except thank you for joining us today.
You're very welcome, my dear. So take good care. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for asking such great questions, and blessings to you and your audience and your whole team and crew that are supporting you in this interview and this whole process of possibility.
Thank you, Alan. Have a wonderful day. Do you have a moving story about your own journey and natural healing path you'd like to share? Drop us a note. info@journeyofpossibilities.com. Until next time, this is Cheryl Sitz reminding you to use your passions and make a bigger difference. Let's co-create holistic sustainability for ourselves and for our planet. Namaste.